Well, it kind of looks like it to me. Like it doesn't look to me like the new version of Trump is the same man we had 8 years ago.
Senator, I'm not going to answer the question.
Why would you answer that question?
The question is,
and so that when Trump gets elected, I mean, they just couldn't allow a nationalist and populist to just rule.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe? Who's on your list?
Like there's a hardness about his gaze.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chief Justice Roberts to administer the presidential oath of office.
If he was genuinely narcissistic, he would be jealous of Musk.
I think everybody on the right in the United States right now is secretly, they won't say it, but they're secretly happy that Trump lost in 2020 because he comes into much more power now than he would have had in 2020.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully
They think of that reaction of rationality against the superstitions of the underlying religious ethos as the moment of clarity that freed the West, but they don't take into account the fact that the deposing of that central icon produces the rise of both power, that's the communists and the fascists, and this nihilistic hedonism, which is equivalent to disintegration and degeneration. Now, Nietzsche knew that was going to happen. Like he knew that. He laid that out very, very clearly, and so did Dostoevsky, and it certainly did happen. You know, maybe we fought off the fascists to some degree on the communist and the Nazi side, but, you know, we fell prey to the nihilistic hedonists starting in the 1960s, and they're in a power dynamic dance anyways. If you're a hedonist, you have to use power, eh? And the reason for that is that if I'm a hedonist and it's all about me, why the hell would you associate with me? Because if it's all about me, it's certainly not about you. And that means that to gratify myself in the moment, I have to use force.
During Donald Trump's first campaign, his slogan, "Drain the Swamp," captured the frustration of many Americans who believed the political establishment was corrupt. At the time, however, he likely had no true understanding of just how deep the corruption ran. Now, he has been battle-tested and fully understands the nature of the forces arrayed against him. This transformation is evident in the way he presents himself today, marked by a seriousness and intensity that contrasts with his earlier, more theatrical persona.
You look back, you look forward, we're clearly entering a new era. You know, and it's not totally clear what it is at all. And look at what we've got on our table. We're coming to a new era. It's a new media ecosystem. You get elected in different ways. It's social media and podcasting. You have to be able to sit. In 1960, you had to be able to be handsome on television. That's what the television revolution about. The podcasting revolution is you must be able to sit for 3 hours with Joe Rogan and answer questions. And if you are unable to do that, as Kamala Harris was, you can't be president.
But she had an opportunity to come here when she was in Texas. And I literally gave them an open invitation. I said, anytime. I said, if she's done at 10 o'clock, we'll come back here at 10 o'clock.
Okay, so you've got to have some intellectual fortitude and stamina.
My whole goal with her and with him was just talk, have a conversation like a human being. You find out things about people. You get a sense of them, at least, a real sense. That was it.
The true wisdom traditions are always emphasizing our mortality, warning of hubris, emphasizing humility and honesty and these really simple basic virtues. And yes, do they change over time? Of course, but yet they also mean the same thing. That all gets forgotten, and so you've forgotten. And so you get this kind of secular post-Cold War establishment, you know, just exactly what it sounds like. Media, university, foreign policy, intelligence community. Because remember, the intelligence community is full of very intelligent people. And they're the children of light, just exactly what Reinhold Niebuhr warned against in his famous lectures from the 1940s, that liberals imagine they're children of light, they can do no harm. We're just going to go into these countries and help them, just going to go in there and help them. Then we're going to help them decide who to get elected. And you got it married to some of the darker forces, which was the CIA, and starting to try to control who gets elected in Italy and then in Greece, and you go all the way from the 40s on. It has a huge moral victory with the fall of communism. The U.S. foreign policy and being trying has this huge moral victory. We then have 9/11 and a kind of, an early sense of moral righteousness, and then it descends into the horrors of Iraq. And then, frankly, we went and overthrew a bunch of governments in the Middle East, surreptitiously, Eastern Europe. And it was a maniacal, I think it was just a power trip, as we would say. These guys are getting off on their power. And so that when Trump gets elected, I mean, they just couldn't allow a nationalist and populist to just rule. They just couldn't allow it. They had to invent this elaborate story about how he was Hitler and it was fascism and there was going to be, this was just like, I mean, it was insane. There was like no evidence to support any of it. It was a complete projection of their own totalitarian fantasies on Trump.
Mr. Trump responded to that criticism and also the criticism that he's Hitler-esque, like asking voters to raise their right hands in a pledge of support.
Sometimes we'll do it for fun, and they'll start screaming at me, do the swearing, do the swearing. I mean, they're having such a great time. Honestly, until this phone call, I didn't know it was a problem. I'll certainly look into it. I mean, I'd like to find out that that's true, but I would certainly look in because I don't want to offend anybody, but I can tell you that it's been...
I think everybody on the right in the United States right now is secretly, they won't say it, but they're secretly happy that Trump lost in 2020 because he comes into much more power now than he would have had in 2020, capable of eliminating, basically our most important, intelligence cutout, our most important overt regime
hopefully
change
much more authority and more authority and wisdom,
and with
rather
the moral,
than power,
and with the
right?
moral authority,
and
that
maybe
comes
some
from popular
humility.
vote. Yeah, and hope.
I
Let's hope. We'll hope.
Jordan Peterson has observed this shift, noting that the current version of Trump exhibits a noticeable depth shaped by experience. In his first campaign, Trump's larger-than-life presence often embodied the archetype of the hustler salesman, a role deeply embedded in American culture. Figures like Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's infamous manager, similarly thrived on their ability to command attention and manipulate public perception. Trump's early political strategy relied heavily on this showmanship. However, as he has endured relentless political and legal attacks, his approach has changed. The man who once relished the spotlight now appears more measured, focused, and determined.
Well, it kind of looks like it to me. Like it doesn't look to me like the new version of Trump is the same man we had 8 years ago. Like there's a hardness about his gaze, first of all, like that. I don't want to call it clowny. Like there was an element of Trump that was huckstery, and that's a deep tradition in the U.S. Well, like Colonel, was it Tom Parker, the guy who ran Elvis? The huckster salesman is a pretty deep American archetype, and there was a fair bit of that that was part of the drama of Trump. But he's got a seriousness of intent that wasn't there before that I think you get from being tried in the fire. And then, I was concerned about his narcissism because Trump is very extroverted and he's very disagreeable. And those are the predictors of narcissism as pathology. Like, not everybody who's extroverted and disagreeable is narcissistic, but that's the tilt.
While the media has spent nearly a decade branding Donald Trump as a narcissist, his long-term relationships tell a different story. A true narcissist struggles to maintain meaningful connections, particularly with adult children. Yet Trump's strong relationships with his family and inner circle suggest otherwise. Moreover, his willingness to endure relentless opposition without crumbling under pressure speaks to a level of resilience beyond mere self-interest. And Jordan Peterson points that out.
But, I've watched him share the stage, for example, with Elon Musk. And if he was genuinely narcissistic, he would be jealous of Musk.
Come here. Take over, Eli. Just take over.
He wouldn't share the stage with him. Because, you might say, well, if you're a narcissist and you're president, that's good enough. But that just means you don't know anything about the clinical world, because nothing is enough for a narcissist. Like there's no filling that hole, because it's all about them. And that's, the more you make it all about you, the deeper the hole. And yet Musk, Trump he pulled in Kennedy, and Kennedy and Musk, I would say, and Tulsi, but even of those three, Kennedy and Musk were probably the only people in the United States who could really give Trump a run for his money in terms of implicit fame and influence.
Our new Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr.
And yet, he invited them along, and they agreed to play, and so far it seems to be working.
With the name Kennedy, you would have thought everybody over here would have been cheering. How quickly they forget.
You know, I just don't think Trump really believed in God until he almost died from a bullet, all of which remains mysterious, unsolved. You have maybe the greatest innovator in American history working to reform government. You know, you have these incredible story arcs with Tulsi and Bobby coming from the left, even the radical left, really, if you're being honest, coming to this place which, you know, to kind of even get that story arc of our villains in this story, you know, the characters who have been abusing power in the ways that we've been looking at. These are people who forgot what America was.
And, you know, J.D. Vance is also an interesting choice because Vance is smart and competent and dynamic, and he's not the sort of weak vice president that
we're used to.
A narcissist would be attracted to.
That's right.
And so,
Michal Shellenberger argues that elites have overstepped by censoring free speech, violating First Amendment rights, and abandoning traditional American values in favor of centralized control.
They forgot what America was about. They forgot that, like, literally free speech is number one, literally and figuratively. Like, you don't mess with that. That is the third rail of American life. If you start to step on someone else's free speech rights in the United States, this is a country that defends that's how seriously we take that. These guys went and messed with the First Amendment. They then went and tried to incarcerate their political opponent, making up just phony thing after phony thing about him misstating, him misdescribing the payment to the porn star, and that was somehow 5 felonies.
Now the Marxist left is once again using the same corrupt DOJ and the same corrupt FBI.
That somehow he had some papers, you know, even though he's the only person that can declassify, I mean, that can sort of declassify documents right away. Somehow he took some papers to his house and it merited an FBI raid on the house of a former president.
In the end, they're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I'm just standing in their way.
It's in the interest of the Luciferian intellects to assume that moral superiority, and in fact, that's like the nature of the Luciferian, is to assume moral superiority, but there's a usurping element of it too. And so the problem with the intelligent, let's say, and the self-satisfied simultaneously is the eternal problem of pride. You know, you're blessed by God, at least so to speak, because your IQ is 3 standard deviations above the mean. And instead of being grateful for that and attempting to use it in service, you worship it and presume that you're ordained by the powers that be to rule the world.
At 77, approval seeking no longer concerns Trump. He acts based on conviction. The assassination attempt against him was a defining moment. It tempered his reactions, making him more strategic and less prone to taking the bait. Trump is not the same man who first took office. Hardened by adversity, he now stands as a leader forged in conflict. Love him or hate him, his transformation is undeniable. The real question is not whether he has changed, but what his new form means for the future of American politics.
We're morally obliged to presume that the future is a welcoming and abundant place. That's a moral obligation. Once you're not naive and you've passed through the valley of nihilism, your moral obligation is to sustain your faith in the future. There's no difference between that and faith in civilization. There's no difference between that and faith in the spirit of life itself, right? And we should also point out, too,